Hello, and welcome to Piece of Pod Employment Law Conversations, your go-to guide for navigating all things employment law related in England. I'm Sarah Whitemore, and I'm an employment lawyer and senior partner in South Coast law firm Warner Goodman, and I've got over 30 years of legal experience. In this podcast, I'll be talking with law firm partners, business owners, entrepreneurs, and other people engaged in the world of work, and we'll be discussing all things related to employment law, how to manage people, and how to excel in today's modern dynamic workplace. So if that's of interest to you, grab yourself a drink, get yourself comfortable, and let's dive in. Today I'm joined by Natalie Rawson. Natalie is an associate solicitor in our Peace of Mind team here at Warner Goodman, and she's been with the firm for about 6 years. She specialises in advising on apprenticeship matters and IR35. I'm delighted that you've joined us today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So, for those who don't know you, what's your journey been? How have you come to the law?
Well, how long have you got? So I obviously went back into education quite late because I had my daughter, and I started by doing a English degree thinking that I was going to be a secondary school teacher. Law wasn't something that I'd even contemplated because I had always thought that law was only really accessible to middle upper class groups of people, and that I just obviously wasn't, I just thought you had to be quite well off and highly educated to be able to do something like that. So I had obviously completed an English degree to start with, and then I realised I didn't want to be a teacher, teaching children. So I had gone to a careers advisor because I got a bit stuck at that point, and they suggested to me about law, and I was a bit apprehensive because of my idea of what you had to, the sort of person you had to be to go into law, and how I would go about doing that, especially as a single parent of a young daughter. So I did look into it and realised that I could do the GDL, which is a 1-year law degree, at Guildford. So through that careers advisor who put that idea in my head, and once I had time to think about it, is where I then obviously studied law. And then from there I always wanted to do either criminal law or employment law once I'd obviously studied the subjects. But I think criminal law, you know, you watch films and series and TV, and it's glamorous in a way, and it's fast paced. So obviously my career started off in criminal law and taught me a great deal over 10 years, but then it has a time limit. I think there's lots of complexities, and you can bring a lot of it home. So I sort of got to a point where I realised that criminal law isn't something that I want to continue in, and employment law was my next sort of passion, because I've always wanted to advise people. I'm a people person, and you know, it's something that is always I enjoyed it, doing it in the law degree. So yeah, so that was when I started trying to get somebody to take me on as an employment lawyer, which it did take over a year, because I think criminal law, I think people generally think that we're a different species. I think people find it quite difficult generally to look at somebody who's got criminal law, and the skill set there is quite different to a commercial corporate type of environment. But after a year, obviously, I managed to succeed here.
And actually, your experience as a criminal defence lawyer has proved invaluable for our team, hasn't it? Because we support employers. Our Peace of Mind package is all about providing support to employers in whatever difficulty they're dealing with. And luckily for us, whenever an employer says, oh, one of my employees has been arrested or is being charged or something's happening, we're able to pass them over to you, and you can advise them on the employment law aspect, but you can also talk through the process. How have you found it to be helpful to you since you've become an employment lawyer?
I've really enjoyed it, actually. I really believe that my sort of the criminal law side of practice had gone, and that was it. And there were some elements of criminal law that I really did enjoy. So I was really surprised when I was able to deal with queries from a criminal law perspective, and that has actually, been something that I've started to regularly advise on. These sorts of issues do rise quite a lot within different businesses. I think it's sort of a really unique perspective that I'm able to offer, because I can see it from a commercial perspective and also from the criminal sides of things. And I think our clients particularly feel quite reassured, because let's say they have an employee who is accused of stealing from them, or has been some sort of criminal offence against the employer. It's quite daunting for that employer, who have never perhaps had to call the police before. They don't quite know what to expect process-wise. So I'm able to sort of give them chapter and verse to reassure them, give them the confidence as to know what's going to happen next, because sometimes there is a breakdown with police or the prosecution in getting in touch with them to let them know about these things, whereas I can properly sort of advise them and prepare them for those things. And likewise with employees that commit offences outside of work, for example, I'm able to advise them as to how to manage the situation.
And it's surprising how often it comes up, actually, isn't it? I mean, without disclosing any confidential client information, which clearly we can't do, you have had to deal with quite a few different types of criminal situation within our client base. Yeah,
we've had some funny stories, but also some very, very serious situations. So that have ranged from discovering an employer's been looking at indecent images of children on the work laptop, and how they manage that. And obviously that would involve the police certainly, but also they would seize the laptop and probably destroy it at the end and things like that, and advising the employer and the HR team around them giving statements, etc., and being part of that process themselves. Equally, some of the funnier ones were where employees have managed to look at the dark web and identify that they can buy cannabis and then have it delivered to work. So things like that, and how to manage that.
And I think with that one, didn't the employee say, well, of course I had it delivered to work because I couldn't have cannabis delivered to me at home.
Exactly. Yeah, because I'm not there to pick up the delivery. Yeah. So there was no kind of understanding that actually you should not have a Class B drug sent to work.
No, and it doesn't cease to amaze me that the way that people react to things, or how the human side of it comes in. I remember many, many years ago now dealing with a haulage company, and they had a driver who basically had a little deal going with the local petrol station. So whenever he filled up with fuel, he got overcharged, and then the excess was split between the fuel company and the driver. Okay. He ended up, I think, with about £20,000 worth of fuel excess that he benefited from. It came to light because a new transport manager came in and looked at the records and said, well, hang on a minute, George's fuel seems to be way off compared to nobody had looked at it before. So he was dismissed for gross misconduct, and he was also prosecuted and he went to prison. And from his prison cell, he put in an application for unpaid holiday pay. And I was just flabbergasted that he'd had £20,000 worth of fuel that he shouldn't have had, of money that he didn't, and here he was saying, and you also owe me £600 for my holiday pay, which is it's just a different way of dealing with it. And for employers, coming to terms with people in their business who they've, trust is an essential part of the employer-employee relationship. Coming to terms with people that they've worked alongside, engaged in criminal activities, can be quite challenging, I think, and that's the sort of thing that you're sort of supporting them with, isn't it?
Yeah, both, especially when it's something that comes to their attention from other colleagues that they're not quite sure if it is the truth or not, because it might be, allegations of criminal conduct outside the workplace, and it's, almost doing a bit of an investigation to make sure that it is the person, so that they're not doing anything that could be construed as a breach of the trust and confidence duty. So it brings all sorts of things, and it's quite scary to go through the criminal justice system, whether you're the person that is the victim or the employer, or you're accusing an employee of doing something. So it's just making sure you've got that balance and that you're prepared to know what to expect in that process.
And if it's something that's happened at work, so we've dealt relatively recently with misuse of company credit cards, people spending on things that they shouldn't be doing, or not accounting correctly for money they've taken in whatever way. There's always a dilemma for an employer as to whether they carry out an investigation themselves or whether they just pick up the phone to the police and the police carry out the investigation. And in your experience, do they have to wait for the police investigation to conclude before they deal with the employee, or what would you recommend?
It depends on the industry and the nature of the offence, I would say. I've certainly been advising employers, for example, that work with vulnerable children, and the allegation is around sexual assault or grooming and things like that. And the first thing I would be saying to do is to, if you've got reasonable suspicion that this has happened, and it's not just some sort of, vexatious allegation by a disgruntled employee that doesn't get on with that person, then they would have their own reporting procedures. So it would probably involve alerting the local authority designated officer or Ofsted or whoever your regulatory body is, so that they can obviously give you some guidance as to next steps, which may obviously include involvement of the police. Sometimes the police will give instructions not to carry out an investigation, which makes it very difficult for the employer, because obviously what you don't want to be doing is having somebody suspended because they can't work because of the nature of the allegations. But then a police investigation, and for it to get to charge, can be a significant amount of time. So that is quite a predicament for the employer. So it may be that you have to go through your process with very limited information. Of course, if it's not something that is of that level, and let's say it's a theft from the employer, then I would say there's no reason why you can't carry out an investigation, but you do have to be very mindful that anything that you're producing, whether it's an interview with the employee that is accused of this in an investigatory meeting or disciplinary hearing, for example, could also be used as evidence that the police want to obtain as part of their investigation. So it's just really important to, I suppose, prepare that this could be seen in a legal process in some way, shape or form, so that you're making sure that you're doing a thorough and proper investigation. But we've had situations where I've advised clients who have been asked to give a statement and provide a lot of general information about an employee, because it was the care sector and they would look after vulnerable adults, and they were accused of a burglary of one of their clients. And it was quite difficult because the police were asking for all details about all of their employees, which obviously you're then encroaching on GDPR. So there's so many different aspects that you have to be mindful of, and whether it is disclosable to even the police. So I think I would strongly advise speaking to us before doing anything.
Because people just assume that if the police ask for something, they must be entitled to it, but that's not always the case.
No. So I've been involved in this particular situation where I've advised to go back to the police that no, we're not disclosing that because that would put us in breach of GDPR. And eventually they're satisfied. I think sometimes, depending on the officer and their experience, they just think that law and under that regulation means that they can automatically get everything, and they can't, and so you do have to challenge these things sometimes.
And I was looking on our own website earlier about you, and I'd forgotten actually that you originally came into the firm as a work experience person, didn't you?
Yeah.
And at the time you were doing something with the Witness Support Service, is that right?
Yeah. So I was, I think, in the middle of my law degree, and so during the 6 weeks holiday I was trying to get some work experience. So I had a week with the prosecution. I had 2 weeks here because you had a criminal defence department at that point. And also I was a volunteer with the Witness Support Service, so that would be maybe once or twice a fortnight, and you would literally go and look after the witnesses that were attending a trial in the magistrates or Crown Court. And it's quite a daunting experience for anybody that is about to give evidence and they're fearful about coming across the defendant. So there was a whole sort of a team of people that provided a service to witnesses specifically. So I did that for about, I think, a year and a half, 2 years.
And the work that you were doing there presumably also has transferable skills, because being able to take the witnesses through the court experience, it's the same for employers taking their employees through the court experience. They need to use the same sort of skills as you had there.
Yeah, and I think it's just, I think a lot of it is just knowledge and explaining to people what to expect. I think if people know exactly what they're about to go through, and how to manage their emotions and concerns, then I think that means that they can go in there knowing exactly what to expect. Some people would go into court not knowing who's going to ask them questions. Is it the magistrates? Is it the judge? And so obviously it's explaining basic things that to me were obvious because that's part of my everyday thing, but lots of the general public have not ever had to experience anything like that. So explaining things in a really easy to understand way, I think, helps them feel reassured and able to give their best evidence.
I suppose most people's experience of court is what they see on the television, and that isn't always an accurate reflection of what happens on the day.
No, and it's a negative experience really. Nobody wants to go to court, and you could be confronted with, let's say you're a victim of a crime, you're reliving it, and so it's quite difficult for them to go through that emotionally, and so to have that team of people to kind of be there for you and to just check in on you and make sure you're okay, it is a valuable service that they offer there.
Absolutely. So moving on then to life at Warner Goodman, and since you've been with us, you've developed quite a niche practice in working with apprenticeships. We talked about that in the introduction a little bit. So you're sort of supporting businesses who use apprentices. And do you find that that's something that is increasingly happening, that apprenticeships are on the up?
It's like a tsunami, I would say, this year in particular. It's certainly increased the last couple of years, but this year, I mean, we're still advising almost on a daily basis in the middle of October, which is obviously quite late because normally people have already started apprenticeships and got everything in place. So it's definitely on the increase from our perspective and advice-wise, but it's also on the rise when it comes to case law that's being generated around looking at the different types of apprenticeships and whether an apprentice has what we call an old-fashioned contract of apprenticeship and whether they have a right to bring a breach of contract claim, and a lot of them are successful. And so that's only really started to come through probably since around 2018-19, I would say. So we're definitely seeing lots and lots of cases coming through the tribunals, and so it is something that employers really do need to be mindful of.
So there's a lot of risk for employers. I think we had a case that we saw where the apprentice had been dismissed. The employer thought that they weren't protected as an employee, and they had brought a claim for breach of contract rather than unfair dismissal. And the breach of contract was valued at £25,000 because they were effectively being paid for their lost opportunity in finishing that apprenticeship scheme. You mentioned there in passing old style apprenticeship agreements and new style. There's a sort of simple difference that makes a big difference, isn't there? So can you just explain that a bit?
Yeah, so there's two types of apprenticeship really. You're looking at the modern apprenticeship, which is governed by the Apprenticeship Skills Children Learning Act, which if you have a modern apprenticeship with your apprentice and all your documentation is compliant, then your apprentice will only have the same rights as any other employee. So if they have less than 2 years service and no protected characteristics, for example, you can dismiss them without following a fair process. The problem is when they don't have the right documentation in place, and one of those documents has to be provided to them by the training provider, what happens is they are putting themselves at risk of having an apprentice with these old-fashioned contract of apprenticeships. which have been in place for decades and decades, and the leading case law around that is dated back to sort of 1938, where they refer to master and servant. But the tribunals are still using that case law today to ascertain whether they have a modern apprenticeship or one of these old-fashioned contracts of apprenticeships. And the reason why that's so important is because if an apprentice is inadvertently given an old-fashioned contract of apprenticeship, which boils down to the documentation they've been given, they have enhanced rights, so they can't be treated just like a typical employee. They have these rights from day one, and they can only be dismissed if they are wholly unteachable, which is a significantly higher threshold than your gross misconduct grounds. And I haven't seen a case where they've been successful in arguing that point, or redundancy, but your usual redundancy rules don't apply. You either have to have a whole shutdown of your business, or you have to completely transform the services that you're offering. And so there's been lots of case law whereby, you know, apprentices have been poorly performing, so failed exam after exam after exam, turning up late, not being competent at the role, or misconduct territory where they've, you know, been disqualified from driving, or prison time, or swearing at managers, etc. But that doesn't make them wholly unteachable. So they can bring a breach of contract claim and, like you say, be awarded significant amounts of compensation.
And you've been encouraging employers to send in their documents for review, because if we have an opportunity to check the documents, then we can avoid them falling into this trap of being
Absolutely.
an old style, because there might be certain things that are left out that they don't realise the importance of, which if they leave them out, they flip into this old style situation. So the other thing I was going to just ask about is employers who already have an employee who's becoming an apprentice. So quite often we see that they're upskilling their staff and using their levy money to train their staff in different areas. And so sometimes those employees will already be working before they get their paperwork, and before they've started being an apprentice before they get their paperwork. And that's significant too, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the fundamental problem is that they think that the employer assumes that they can just continue on the same contract of employment, and they can't. So for existing staff, they do need to be issued with a compliant apprenticeship agreement, which is a different version of a contract of employment, but it also has to have a lot of mandatory clauses that a contract of employment doesn't have. And so if you have existing staff and they don't have a compliant apprenticeship agreement in place, then again you're facing the fact that they may have an old-fashioned contract of apprenticeship. And the other issue, of course, is that for an apprentice under a compliant modern apprenticeship agreement, it has to be for a fixed term. So the fundamental problem is that you have an existing member of staff on a permanent contract, and to become an apprentice they then have to go on a new contract. Their continuous service carries over, but they have a fixed term clause suddenly in their contract, which makes them feel very unsafe, because they don't know, you know, if their role is going to come to an end. So I think a lot of it is a selling exercise. You know, some clients are offering to pay for apprenticeships that are degree level, for example. So we all know how much it costs to, you know, go to university and pay for a degree. Lots of people are paying it off for decades. So sometimes it's about saying, look, you're being given a free degree here or equivalent course, which you don't have to pay back, and we want to invest in you. We're not going to put you through a course to get rid of you. We want to invest in you. So we have to have a fixed term clause in there, but that's because we have to comply with the law, and then we have every intention of taking you on permanently and giving you a permanent contract once that apprenticeship has come to an end. So I think a lot of it is around selling, but that is a recurring concern that employers do have.
And they're concerns that we can easily help them with, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we're not here to say don't have apprentices.
No.
We've seen a lot of apprentices through our business, and there's a lot of value to be had in having apprenticeships. It's just very important that you come to us and get the documentation right.
Absolutely.
So that you're then in a position where you're able to use these apprentices to your advantage.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's key, because I think sometimes, you know, in trying to explain the differences, people can be sort of blindsided by the negativity of the consequences that can happen. But ultimately, all they need to make sure that they have is a compliant modern apprenticeship agreement, which we draft for our clients anyway, and also to make sure that the training plan that the training provider is responsible for drafting and issuing is also compliant, which again is a service that we provide to our clients. If those two documents are compliant, signed and issued, to the apprentice, then there's no, then they just have a typical employee who happens to be an apprentice, and they can, they're not given any different rights than anybody else.
So bringing things up to date a little bit, so you've been with the firm for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
Halfway through that, we had this thing called COVID drop on our heads, a bit of a pandemic started, and that was a challenging time for employment lawyers, wasn't it? I mean, how was it for you?
It was, it almost feels like it wasn't real when I look back now. I mean, I just remember just the whole panic of sort of the world watching it on the BBC News and initially thinking, oh, that's not going to come to the UK, and then it did, and then everything shut down, and it just felt quite surreal. And I do remember quite clearly, because we were obviously in the office, sharing an office Monday to Friday, and we were all told that, Friday was the last day, and we had been given a box by Cat.
Like survival kit,
yes,
wasn't it?
Yeah, and we had to pack everything, and we were then going to be working from home for, we didn't know how long. So yeah, I remember feeling like I'm not happy about it. I think me and you were probably the last ones. I think other people had sort of started to work from home before then, but we were quite, I think we found it quite difficult to suddenly, not have that and to adapt to something different. And so I think to begin with, that in itself was quite difficult, because we as a team work very closely with each other and have really good rapport, and then suddenly we're all isolated working from home. So that was a big thing to adapt to. And then I think for us, it literally turned into a tsunami, didn't it, overnight? Certainly when sort of furlough began, and nobody understood what on earth furlough was, and the government weren't doing a particularly good job in explaining that, and the guidance was coming out, and we were having to literally read it and hot off the press, and then generate all of these documents and guides and briefing notes and things like that to keep our clients up to speed with all the variety of different things. So it then went from what is a very busy job to manic, and it was trying to sort of cope under those pressures, which I think we did really well as a team.
Absolutely. I mean, Friday evenings for me, they started off, didn't they? There were Zoom quizzes happening, everyone up and down the line, cracking open the wine, getting the crisps and hummus ready, and off we go with a quiz. And it quite quickly morphed into, it's me and Rishi, and we're just having this little relationship, working out what he's going to do next, and it was quite traumatic. Yeah. Our employers portal, though, came into its own at that point, didn't it? We started doing FAQs, and our clients started using our website to get that information from us, and we got a lot of appreciation from them for that, didn't we?
Yeah, because it wasn't, it was furlough, which was constantly changing and being updated. Then it was, what's a key worker? Because key workers had that additional freedom to leave the house and do certain roles and work from the office. And then it was also about SSP and all of those things. So,
and holiday was a big thing. I remember what's going to happen about holiday whilst people are on furlough. Meantime, the clock's ticking along, and it was quite traumatic. So we were working from home exclusively at that time. We tried to sort of keep in touch with regular Zoom calls twice a day with the team, trying to bring them together. We had our own quizzes, didn't we? Yeah. We did do our own quizzes on those calls as well. And then the world opened up a bit, and we started to bring people back to the office. And our team has settled on a hybrid working pattern, as lots and lots of businesses, lots of our clients do as well. How does hybrid working work for you?
I think it works quite well, actually. I think if you'd have spoken to me before, COVID had hit, I'd have been like, I'm never ever working from home. And then obviously when we'd all worked from home for quite a long time, then I was like, I'm never going back to the office.
Yeah, we kind of became hermits, didn't we?
We did, yeah, I became a bit feral, that's for sure. So it was very difficult to kind of integrate back into being around other people, and I was quite surprised at how difficult I found that coming into the office at all, because I think just things like phone calls, I mean, before COVID, you and I would be able to be on the phone to clients at the same time, and we could just block each other out, and it wouldn't faze me at all, wouldn't think about it. But then returning to the office, any sound or noise from it was just a complete distraction. So I did find it quite difficult to adapt back to coming in, but I think now it works quite well actually. I think it's a really good balance. I think, you know, we have days, you know, I always look forward to a Tuesday because I know everyone's going to be in and we can all touch base and catch up, and I sometimes will reserve questions that I know that I can ask everybody once I get into the office on a Tuesday and speak to people. So I think it works really well.
So I have to say this and say it publicly, I really admire you. You're a single mum, as you said in the video earlier. You talked about the fact you brought your daughter up and you went to university with your daughter still very young, and you've qualified, and you've also fostered children along the way as well. With all of that to juggle, and our jobs are very challenging as we both know, how have you managed to make time for yourself? What does Natalie do for Natalie's?
Well, I think everybody probably knows about the animals that I have. So I think that's where I seek my sort of hobbies, if you like, with the Bengals and my tortoises. So they bring me a lot of joy. I think for me, I think as I've always been an ambitious person, there is no way that I would ever be, you know, able to just sort of, you know, not work or work part-time or anything like that. For me, I've always been somebody that thinks working is very important. So so I think you just adapt, don't you? And it's something that you just get used to. So for sort of hobbies and things like that, or how I sort of deal with everything in personal life, I would say it's just kind of, I think I'm always fast paced, so I'm always on the go and doing something. So I don't think there is anything that I can say that I would do to relax, because I think I'm somebody that will always find hobbies and projects. So I do a lot of DIY at home, which is I find quite therapeutic, or gardening or something like that. So and then I just love my job. So for me, it's not an issue. It's not something, you know, I appreciate some people don't really enjoy their jobs, and you know, that's not great. But for me, it's something I'm really passionate about. I love coming to work. I love what I do. So for me, it's not a chore at all. So so the fostering, and I mean, my daughter's an adult now, although she sometimes acts like a 2-year-old. But so she's very independent herself. So we work quite well as a team at home. And so I'm a bit unorganised, as you know. But other than that, I think you just kind of adapt.
And when you look then to sort of the next generation of lawyers, because I'm really sorry to tell you, but you are one of the grown-ups now. When you look at the next generation of lawyers, what sort of advice do you have for them coming up? What are the key things they need to be thinking about as they're going through their careers?
I think when I look back to when I started, and you won't believe it, but I was almost mute. I
won't believe that.
No, I was so shy and really introverted and had no confidence whatsoever. And I think, I think the first thing to do is to try to get experience during your law degree or your legal practice course, whatever. I think that really did help me understand the law, because when you're looking at it from an academic perspective, it's very, very different to being in practice. And so I think getting that experience from different areas of law will help you understand, actually, is this something I really want to go into? We spend a long time, getting educated, getting ready, and then obviously we've got the training contract, so it's a long time before you're actually qualified. So it's so important to try to help yourself to get the experience where you can, so that it really, you know what to expect, and is this something I really want to go into? I also think, sometimes, certainly my criminal defence days, that kind of, I was dropped in the deep end, if you like. So it was either sink or swim. So I think that really helped me come out of my shell and become quite assertive, confident sometimes, because I think a lot of people think, oh well, like I did, it's for middle upper class people. It's not. A lot of services within law are being provided to normal everyday people. We used to joke in the criminal defence team about Johnny Pinstripes coming along, because sometimes, people would have a stereotypical idea of a lawyer or a barrister being somebody who's absolutely loaded with yachts and can't relate to the normal general public, and I'm just a normal everyday working class girl, and I think having those social skills and communication are just as important as understanding the law. So I would say, if you feel you're somebody that lacks confidence, don't let that put you off. A lot of it is to do with obviously understanding the law, but having really great social and communication skills with people. So I would say that's a key factor. But choose the area wisely, I would say.
So that brings me to another question. So 7 years in criminal law?
Yeah.
6 years so far in employment law?
Yeah.
Are we
7 year itch?
Yeah. We've got a different area before you want to go into?
Absolutely not, no.
Thank goodness for that.
No, employment law is where I will be staying until I'm 105, so yeah.
Excellent. And that's probably where the retirement age will be by the time we get that far.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So any final words of wisdom or encouragement for our audience at all?
Well, it depends who the audience are, I guess. If you're wanting to consider law, like I say, try to get some experience, speak to people that are in the legal profession. Don't be scared of us if you want to come and have a chat with people, because we're all just normal everyday people. If you're an employer, then obviously, and you're looking to take on apprentices, then I would strongly suggest getting some legal advice, whether that's us or somebody else. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, it is pretty much it, but the last bit of the podcast, as ever, is our audience-sourced questions. So we've got 3 questions here for you. You can pick which one you want,
okay,
and let's see what you get.
This one. Okay. Describe a moment when you had to take a significant risk in your career or business. What was the outcome, and what did you learn from the experience? I'd actually say probably changing from criminal to employment law was a massive risk to me. And I have to say that my peers in the criminal defence world were actually really shocked that I was able to jump ship into employment law. So obviously criminal law is a very difficult career, and I would say that it's not something necessarily that it's not great to be able to do that for decades and decades. It can take a toll on mental health, time, you're at the police station 24/7, it's a very stressful job. And so I kind of got to a point where I'd peaked, and I got to a stage where I felt that I'd got experience in everything that I wanted to do and got from it. And I wanted to go into employment law, but I wasn't sure because I'd never practiced in employment law. A lot of my training contract was around, I did a majority of it in crime and a bit in conveyancing. And so my concern was that if I leave my firm that I was at, I knew very well for 10 years, and then jump ship and go to a totally new firm, totally new area of law, which I didn't know if I'd be any good at or not. There's a massive risk that I've lost my job and I have to leave that one, and I don't know what else I'm going to do. So that was a big jump that I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but I'm actually so grateful and pleased that I did take that risk, because it was the best thing I've ever done, I would say.
And we're really grateful too. I mean, what's the old expression, is it bear loss, our gain? Thank you so much for taking the leap, for making that risky step.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here on the podcast today. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I'll continue the conversation back in the office.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. We hope you found the discussions insightful and empowering. To stay connected and continue receiving valuable content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and be the first to know about our upcoming episodes. Don't forget to follow us on social media as well. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook and LinkedIn at Warner Goodman LLP, as well as YouTube at Piece of Pod. Thank you again. Until next time.